That morning began exactly like every other Saturday morning, so calm that if anyone had asked me then whether anything in my life was about to change, I would have shaken my head and said, no, nothing at all. The weekend farmer's market opened early, the familiar smell of baked bread mixed with ripe apples. The stalls lined up neatly, like an old routine I had kept for more than 20 years. I held my wicker basket, walked slowly along the narrow aisle, stopped by Linda's stand to choose tomatoes, nodded to Joe, who sold honey. Everything moving in a steady rhythm that made it easy to believe that life, at least for me, had already settled. I was bending down to look at a few bunches of scallions when I heard someone call my name, very softly but clearly, as if afraid of being overheard. "Mr. Carter?" I turned around. A man much younger than me, wearing a gray delivery uniform, stood less than 2 steps away. His eyes were not the eyes of a typical delivery driver, not rushed, not indifferent, but tense, searching, as if he were asking himself whether he should keep talking. He glanced around, then looked back at me and asked in a near whisper, "Are you Emily's father?" I nodded instinctively. He pressed a thin brown paper package into my hand, lighter than I expected. "This is for you," he said quickly. "Just open it by yourself." Then, before I could ask anything, he turned and disappeared into the crowd, as if he had never been there. I stood still in the middle of the market, the package in my hand, feeling my heart beat slow but heavy, as though something foreign had just been placed into my otherwise familiar life. I did not open it. I slipped it into my basket, finished buying the rest of what I needed, paid, exchanged greetings, did everything I always did, as if keeping the old rhythm might prevent anything from changing too quickly. It was not until I got home, set the basket down on the kitchen table, and saw the sunlight coming through the window, like on every other morning, that I finally stopped. But before I tell you how I opened that package, I need to go back a little, back to the reality I had believed in for more than 2 years. The reality I had personally shielded from every doubt. My name is Daniel Carter. I am 62 years old. I live alone in a small house on the edge of town, the house my wife and I bought when our daughter was still in elementary school. My wife passed away nearly 5 years ago after a short but violent illness. And since then, my life has narrowed into neat habits with very little disruption. I wake up early, drink black coffee, read the newspaper, go to the market on weekends, tend the small vegetable garden behind the house, and in the evenings, rewatch old programs. I am not sad in a loud way. I'm sad in the way people grow used to absence until it becomes part of the room. Emily is my only daughter. She got married more than 7 years ago and moved to live with her husband in another city. My son-in-law, Mark, is a polite man, measured in his speech, always looking people in the eye when he greets them. He works in consulting, travels often, and makes short but urgent phone calls. A little over 2 years ago, Mark called me and said Emily had been assigned to a long-term business trip abroad, a major project, a rare opportunity. 2 years and 4 months, he said. Maybe more, maybe less, depending on progress. Emily called me once before she left. Her voice rushed and slightly tired, but still smiling, saying everything was fine, that this was a good opportunity for her future. I believed her. I had no reason not to. After that, whenever I asked about her, Mark was the one who answered. He said Emily was busy with meetings, dealing with time zone differences, poor signal, then forwarded me a few lines said to be from her. Those messages were short, very short. Things like, "I'm fine, don't worry," or "Work is heavy, but I can handle it." No emojis, no questions back, none of the small details Emily used to share. But I told myself that work could change people. I told myself the world was different now, that people were used to saying less and living faster. I told myself that as long as my daughter was safe, everything else could be overlooked. Sometimes I suggested a video call. Mark always had a reason. She's in a meeting, or she's on a flight, or the internet there is very bad, Dad. I nodded, said it was fine. Maybe another time. I did not want to become a difficult, clingy old father, asking questions that made people uncomfortable. I wanted to believe I was respecting my daughter's private life, that I was doing the right thing. Some evenings, sitting alone in the living room, I would look at the empty chair across from me and think that I should have heard her voice more often, should have seen her face more. But then I would think she was grown. She had her own family now, and I could not pull her back just to ease my own loneliness. So I let the silence stretch on, letting the gaps be filled with Mark's reasonable explanations. He was always on time, always polite, always just concerned enough without being excessive. He asked about my health, reminded me to get regular checkups, sometimes brought gifts when he visited, a caring husband, a son-in-law with nothing to complain about. If there was something wrong, I never named it. I placed it in a dim corner of my mind where doubts were not strong enough to become questions. I chose to believe, because believing was far lighter than doubting. Believing allowed me to keep going to the Saturday morning market, to keep living in the familiar house, to keep telling friends that my daughter was working abroad and that everything was fine. I chose to believe, not because I was foolish, but because I was afraid of the moment when I might have to face the possibility that something was truly wrong. And on that morning at the farmer's market, when the brown paper package lay in my wicker basket, I still did not know that the cost of that choice was about to be placed squarely on my kitchen table, where there would no longer be any place for me to look away. I placed the brown paper package on the kitchen table and stood there looking at it for a long moment, not because I was afraid, but because I was weighing whether I should remain the man from the farmer's market that morning or become someone who opened a door that once opened could never be closed again. Sunlight slanted through the window and fell directly onto the old wooden table where my wife and I used to eat breakfast, where Emily once did her homework, where every story in this family had begun and ended. I took off my jacket, hung it on the hook, washed my hands slowly, as if each familiar motion might buy me a few more seconds before the truth forced me to look straight at it. The package was so light that when I lifted it, I almost felt no weight at all. There was no return address, no stamp, no handwriting, just a layer of brown paper folded neatly and sealed with clear tape. I used my fingernail to peel back the edge of the tape, hearing the soft ripping sound echo in the quiet kitchen, and opened it. Inside were 3 items arranged neatly, as if someone had carefully thought through the order in which I would see them. A small black USB drive, smooth and unlabeled. A white envelope with no recipient name, only a few scrawled words in the corner. Please read. And a photograph printed on ordinary paper, slightly blurred at the edges, as if rushed out of an office printer. I picked up the photograph first. My heart did not beat faster, but something inside me sank, as if my body had recognized what my mind had not yet named. The person in the photo was Emily. I did not need to look closely to know the outline of her face, the slightly pointed chin, the eyes I had been looking at for more than 30 years. But everything else was wrong. She was thinner than I remembered, thin in a way that was not dieting or temporary fatigue. Her skin was pale, without a trace of color. Her hair was tied back, no makeup. She was standing in front of a light gray wall, bare and empty. No windows, no furniture, only a metal chair behind her. In her hands was a folded newspaper, the headline and date clearly visible. I had to look twice to be sure I was not mistaken. The date was 8 months earlier, not 2 years ago, not before the business trip, but a completely different point in time. Right in the middle of the period when I had been told my daughter was flying from one city to another, living in brightly lit hotels and sterile conference rooms. Emily was not looking directly at the camera. Her gaze was angled slightly to the side, as if she were looking at someone standing just outside the frame. This was not the look of someone posing for a commemorative photo. It was the look of someone waiting for permission. I set the photograph down and opened the envelope. The paper inside was thin, the handwriting small and dense, as if the writer feared there would not be enough space to say everything. Mr. Carter, the letter began without preamble. The writer introduced himself as a freelance delivery driver taking short-term contracts for various clients. For more than a year, he had been delivering regular packages to the same location at the request of my son-in-law. That location was not an office, not a private home, but a facility on the outskirts of the city, called by a name that sounded harmless enough. He did not name it right away. He wrote that 3 weeks earlier, on a delivery earlier than usual, he had seen Emily through a glass door. Not a glimpse, not a mistake. He clearly saw the woman from this photograph standing inside, behind a reception desk, and in the moment their eyes met, he knew he should not have been seeing that scene. She looked at me like I was a window, the letter said, not a person, like the outside world had just walked past. He wrote that he had gone home that day with a heavy feeling he could not explain, that he had a family and a young child, and that he had tried to convince himself he was mistaken, that it was none of his business. But he could not. I can't pretend I didn't see her. The line slanted slightly, as if written with a shaking hand. He apologized for not signing his full name, apologized for the delay, apologized for not being able to do more. The truth matters, he concluded, even if it's inconvenient. I folded the letter and sat down. The kitchen was so quiet that I could clearly hear the ticking of the wall clock, a sound I had never really noticed before. I picked up the USB drive and turned it between my fingers. It was cold, smooth, offering no information beyond the fact that it existed. I did not plug it in yet. I stood up, poured myself a glass of water, took a long drink, then looked at the photograph again. There was one detail I had not noticed at first, but now I could not ignore it. On Emily's wrist, just below the sleeve, there was a faint, yellowish bruise, nearly faded. No one takes a promotional work photo with a bruise like that. No one on a business trip abroad stands in front of a blank wall, holding a newspaper to prove the date, like a hostage in the photos I had seen in the news. I felt a wave of heat run up my spine, not an explosive burst of anger, but something deeper and slower, like the moment someone realizes they took the wrong road a long time ago and now cannot turn back. I opened my old laptop, the one Emily had helped set up for me years earlier, patiently teaching me how to send emails and save photos. I plugged in the USB drive. A single folder appeared on the screen containing 4 video files and 1 PDF. I did not open them right away. I looked at the clock. It was only 11 in the morning. The whole day stretched ahead. I thought of Mark. I thought of the short phone calls, the smooth explanations, the messages said to be from my daughter. I thought of how proudly I had told my neighbors that Emily was working abroad, that she was busy but happy. I thought of every time I had not asked the next question. Part of me still clung to the possibility that everything could be explained, that there was some reasonable justification for this photograph, this letter, this USB drive. But another part, the part I had suppressed for more than 2 years, began to speak up quietly, without panic, simply refusing to accept any more convenient explanations. I opened the PDF first. It was a medical report, dry in language, standard in format, filled with terms I did not fully understand. Emily's name was at the top. Date of admission. A vague diagnosis of prolonged stress and temporarily impaired decision-making capacity. No specific accident, no clear underlying condition, just wording ambiguous enough to be extended indefinitely. At the signature line, I saw Mark's name, my son-in-law's signature, neat and decisive. I leaned back in the chair. In my mind, 2 pieces of information that had seemed unrelated suddenly locked together in a chilling way. Emily's business trip began at exactly the time this report recorded, 2 years and 4 months. Time had not passed the way I thought it had. It had been held, boxed inside a room I had never entered. I shut the laptop. I needed air. I opened the back door, stepped onto the porch, and took a deep breath. The garden looked the same as always. The apple tree I had planted when Emily was 10 still stood there, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze. Nothing outside had changed, and that made what I had just read feel even more unreal. I wondered how many other signs I had overlooked. I wondered why a stranger had to be the one to bring the truth to me in a brown paper package at a farmer's market. I wondered why my son-in-law, the man who always seemed so caring, was the one who had signed a report allowing my daughter to be confined under a label that sounded reasonable. And for the first time, I allowed myself to admit something I had avoided before. If Emily was not abroad, if she had been somewhere very close to me all this time, then I was not just a father who had been deceived. I was a father who had not searched hard enough. The anger rose then, not as a blazing fire, but as a dense, heavy heat pressing against my chest. It did not make me tremble. It made me clear-headed. I went back to the kitchen table, sat down, opened the laptop again, and clicked on the first video file, knowing that from this moment on, I would no longer be allowed to pretend that I had not seen, not known, or not understood. I plugged the USB into my laptop and opened the first file immediately. No music, no logo, just a static frame like a security camera feed. The camera angle was high, looking down into a bare room with light gray walls and no windows. The date and time were visible in the corner of the screen. That was the first thing I looked at. I remembered that day clearly. Mark had texted me, "Emily is in Berlin, meetings all day." On the screen, Emily was sitting on a metal chair, her hands resting on her lap, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the door. There was no suitcase, no laptop, nothing belonging to someone on a business trip abroad. The door opened. Mark walked into the frame, his shirt neat, a folder in his hand. He set the folder on the table, pointed to a page, and said something. The audio was muted, but I did not need to hear it to understand. Emily shook her head. Mark nodded, turned, and walked out. Emily remained sitting there alone. The video ended after exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. I opened the second file. The same room, the same camera angle, but Emily looked thinner. The date and time jumped forward 4 months. This time, there was an additional woman wearing a white lab coat. She stood next to Mark and opened another folder. Emily said something slowly and clearly. The woman took notes. Mark nodded. Emily picked up a pen and signed. No one explained anything. No one asked for her opinion. Everything happened quickly and efficiently, like an administrative procedure. After Emily finished signing, Mark placed his hand on her shoulder, holding it there a moment longer than necessary before letting go. The video stopped. The third file showed a hallway. Emily walked between 2 staff members. She was not tied, not pushed, but it was clear she had no other option. As they passed the camera, Emily lifted her head and looked directly into the lens. Just for 1 second. A brief, clear-eyed look, as if she were telling anyone who might see this that she was still there, still aware of everything. I paused the video at that exact moment. I opened my phone and went to my message history with Mark. I did not read it emotionally. I read it the way someone reviews a case file. On the date Emily appeared in the first video, Mark had texted, "She just landed after a long flight, very tired." On the date of the second video, "Meetings all day today, not a good time to call." On the date of the third video, "The network over there is unstable." I scrolled up and down, comparing dates and times. There were no gaps, no mistakes. Mark's story matched what I was seeing perfectly, in a way that could only happen if it had been prepared in advance. I opened the PDF file again. This time I did not read from the beginning. I went straight to the signature line. Mark's name appeared under spouse and legal decision maker. The signature date matched the date in the first video. I scrolled down to the diagnosis section. There was no accident, no specific incident, just temporarily unfit to make decisions. I knew enough about life to understand that a phrase like that could be extended indefinitely, as long as no one challenged it. I looked at the address of the facility listed at the bottom of the page. I opened the map. The distance from my house to that place was 48 minutes by car. I closed the laptop. I did not call Mark. I drove. I went to the central post office where the delivery driver in the letter said he took assignments. I asked directly. The manager shook his head and said he had no information. I left my name and said I only needed to know one thing: who had signed the delivery contract. 20 minutes later, another employee came out to speak with me quietly. He said the contract was under an intermediary company, but the delivery address was always the same. He did not give me paperwork. He only said one sentence: "If you find the right place, you'll understand why they don't want attention." I thanked him and left. That evening, Mark called me. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering. "Did you call me, Dad?" he asked, his voice normal. "No," I said, just answering. There was a very brief silence. "Emily has been really busy lately," Mark continued, as if following a familiar script. "She sends her regards." "Let me speak to her," I said. "Now?" Mark asked. "Now," I repeated. The silence stretched longer. "It's not convenient, Dad," Mark said. "She's resting." "Mark," I said, "I'm only asking once." He exhaled. "Let me check." The call ended. 10 minutes later, Mark called back. This time it was a video call. Emily appeared on the screen sitting in front of a blank wall. I recognized that wall immediately. It was identical to the one in the videos. "Hi, Dad," Emily said. Her voice was even, not shaking. "I'm fine." "Where are you?" I asked. Emily glanced to the side very quickly. "I'm abroad," she said. "Where?" I asked again. "Dad." Mark cut in from off camera. "Don't put her on the spot." I looked straight at the screen. "Emily," I said, "are you free?" There was a pause. A pause long enough for me to know the answer before it was spoken. "Don't worry," Emily said, her voice lower. "I'm fine." The call ended immediately. No goodbye. I sat still for a few seconds, then reopened the hallway video and scrubbed to the exact moment Emily looked into the camera. I compared that look to the one I had just seen on my phone screen. The same. Clear. Intentional. Not the look of someone who lacked capacity. I did not need to think any further. I opened my contacts and called an old friend who was a lawyer. I did not describe my feelings. I only stated facts. "My daughter is being held in a private care facility," I said. "Her husband signed the papers. I have video. I need to know what I should do next." On the other end of the line, he was silent for a moment, then said, "Daniel, don't call your son-in-law anymore. Don't tell anyone that you know. And tomorrow, bring everything you have to my office." I hung up. I looked around the house at the things that were still there, still in their places, as if the world had not changed at all, but I knew it had. Emily had never been abroad. She had been right here, within my reach, for more than 2 years, while someone had used reasonable explanations to keep me standing exactly where I was. I gathered the USB drive, the printed report, and the photograph into an envelope and set it on the table. For the first time since that morning at the farmer's market, I no longer felt confused. There was only one thing left to do next, and I knew for certain that I would not stop halfway. The next morning, I arrived at my lawyer's office 10 minutes early. I didn't bring much with me. The USB drive, the printed medical report, the photograph, and my phone. I placed everything on the desk in front of him and didn't say a word until he finished reading. My lawyer, Richard Hale, was accustomed to hearing unbelievable stories, but I still saw him pause at several points, especially at Mark's signature on the report. He turned the laptop screen toward me and pointed to a line. "Do you see this part?" I nodded. "Spouse and legal decision-maker." Richard closed the laptop. "This isn't a medical matter," he said. "This is about authority." He asked me a series of very specific questions. Did Emily have assets of her own? Were there joint accounts? Were there any family trusts or a will involved? I answered briefly. Emily had been left part of an insurance payout and a long-term investment by her mother. I was the temporary manager until she settled into married life. After the marriage, Mark had asked about those assets. I'd said that everything came with conditions and could not be withdrawn immediately. Richard didn't comment, just took notes. "Do you still have any documents related to those assets?" he asked. I said yes. "At home." "Good," he said, "because if I'm right, Mark doesn't just want to control Emily. He's looking for something." That afternoon, I went home and began checking the filing cabinet in my study. I didn't search in a panic. I worked through it one drawer at a time, opening, checking, closing. Old bills, insurance contracts, bank documents. Nothing seemed unusual until I noticed something simple. Some folders had been opened before, not recently, but quite a long time ago. The edges of the papers were slightly bent. The order wasn't exactly how I remembered it. I recalled the image from the video I had watched earlier, Mark standing in the gray room holding a folder. I compared dates and times. The weekends I had been away, the times Mark had stopped by to check on my health. I didn't need to speculate further. I called Richard. "You were right," I said. "Someone has been going through my papers." That evening, Mark called again. I let the phone ring once before answering. "Dad," he said, "she's tired today. It's not a good time to talk." "That's fine," I replied. "I'm not calling about that." There was a brief pause. "Are you free next week?" Mark asked. "I want to come by and look over some old family documents. Emily's worried that if something happens later, things could get messy." I looked out of the window, where the streetlights had just turned on. "All right," I said. "Come by." I didn't explain further. Mark thanked me, his voice relieved. The call ended. Right after that, I opened my phone and sent a message to Richard. "He's coming, asking for documents." He replied almost immediately. "Good. Don't refuse. Just don't give him anything yet." I followed his advice. I didn't call Emily. I didn't ask any more questions. I just waited. 2 days later, I received an email from the old bank where my wife had once opened a safe deposit box. The email reminded me that the maintenance fee was coming due. I had forgotten about that box. I called back and confirmed the access code. The clerk said the box was still intact and had not been opened since my wife passed away. The next morning, I drove to the bank. I didn't tell anyone. An employee led me into a small room in the back. When the metal box was placed on the table and opened, I found 3 things inside: a copy of a will, a thin folder labeled Emily Trust, and a sealed envelope addressed to me. I opened the envelope first. My wife's handwriting appeared, familiar and clear. She didn't waste words. She wrote that she had created a trust for Emily, with the condition that funds could only be released with Emily's own signature and without any form of guardianship. If Emily lost capacity, management would revert to me. There was no mention of Mark. I folded the letter and set it aside. I understood why Mark had been searching. I understood why the folders in my house had been disturbed. That afternoon, Mark came over. He brought coffee, exchanged a few polite remarks, then went straight to the point. Emily's worried that some of the old documents might get lost. He said, "I think it would be best if we gathered everything together, just in case." I nodded and led him into the study. I opened the cabinet and took out a few unrelated folders. Mark flipped through them quickly, not reading carefully, just scanning titles. He asked about Emily's investment fund. I said everything was held at a bank. "Which bank?" Mark asked. "The old one," I replied. He asked for the name. I said I didn't remember exactly. Mark smiled, but his eyes didn't. "That's fine," he said. "We'll find it when we need to." He stayed another 10 minutes, then left. I stood at the door and watched until his car disappeared. That same evening, I received another email. This time, it wasn't from the bank. It was a medical notice requesting that I bring Emily in to sign additional paperwork to optimize the care process. I forwarded the email to Richard. He called me right away. "They're getting anxious," he said. "When people start speeding things up, it means they're afraid of losing something they think they're about to have." I asked what the next step was. "We need evidence from inside the facility," he said. "Not the videos you have. Those are good, but not enough. We need someone to speak about what they're doing." 2 days later, I received a call from an unknown number. A woman said her name was Claire. She had worked in administration at the facility where Emily was being held. She spoke very quickly, as if afraid of being overheard. "I can't meet you for long," she said, "but I know what you're looking for." We met at a small diner near the highway. Claire brought a stack of photocopied papers, internal lists, restricted visitation schedules, doctor's notes about avoiding family contact. She pointed to one line. "Every time Mark comes in, they update the file the same day," she said. "Not because Emily changes, because he requests it." I asked why she was helping me. Claire looked around, then said, "Because I've seen too many people kept there just because they have assets." I took the stack of papers back and gave them to Richard. He reviewed them and nodded. "This is enough to begin," he said. "But you need to be prepared. When you move forward, they'll strike back." I didn't ask how. I had already seen what they did to Emily. 2 days later, I received an envelope from the court, a petition for a competency evaluation of me, filed by Mark. The reasons listed were confusion, paranoia, and inappropriate interference in my daughter's care. Richard read the document and exhaled. "This is the next step," he said. Exactly what they did to Emily. I folded the envelope and set it on the table. Mark wasn't just searching for documents. He was preparing to remove me from the equation. But this time, I wasn't standing alone, and I had enough evidence to know exactly what I was up against. 3 days after the petition for my competency evaluation was filed, Mark began showing up in places he had never paid attention to before. A neighbor told me that a man had been standing in front of my house for quite a while one afternoon, pretending to be on his phone, then leaving when another car passed by. That evening, when I went out to take the trash, I noticed that my mailbox had been opened and then closed carelessly. Nothing was missing. It was just a sign, enough for me to understand the message. "We know what you're doing." Richard called me every night, brief and to the point. He updated me on the case, reminded me not to sign any documents, not to answer medical questions over the phone, not to meet Mark without a third party present. "From now on," he said, Everything you do can be interpreted against you." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. I taped a small note to the refrigerator written in black marker, "Don't explain." Document. I followed it like a rule. On Thursday morning, I received a call from my regular clinic. The receptionist said my doctor wanted to check in briefly about my recent health. I asked who had requested the call. She hesitated, then said that a family member had expressed concern. I thanked her and said I would schedule an in-person appointment. I hung up, took a screenshot of the call log, and sent it to Richard. He replied immediately, "Good, they're laying groundwork." That afternoon, another email arrived, this time from the care facility where Emily was being held. The message was polite, full of professional terminology, requesting that I sign an additional authorization allowing them to adjust the care plan due to signs of patient instability when influenced by external factors. I read it once, didn't respond, and forwarded it to Richard. 10 minutes later, he called. "Don't reply," he said. "They're building a record that you're negatively influencing Emily." That evening, Mark showed up at my door unannounced. He stood on the porch holding a thin envelope. "Dad," he said, "I'm worried about you." I didn't invite him in. I stayed in the doorway. "I'm fine," I replied. "What is it?" Mark held up the envelope. "Just some confirmation forms. The doctor thinks you should do a few small tests just to be safe." I looked straight at him. "Let my lawyer review them," I said. Mark pressed his lips together and nodded. "You've always been careful," he said. "I just want what's best for Emily." I didn't answer. Mark stood there a few more seconds, then turned and left. I closed the door, locked it, and immediately noted the time, the content, and took photos of the unopened envelope. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was afraid, but because my phone kept vibrating. Messages from an unknown number, no greeting, just one line, "Stop interfering." I took screenshots and sent them to Richard. He replied briefly, "Keep it. This helps." I put the phone down and sat at the kitchen table until dawn. The next morning, Claire called me again. Her voice was more tense than before. "They're doing an internal review," she said. "Some files have disappeared. I think they suspect someone talked." I asked if she was safe. "Not yet," she answered honestly. "But I have something else." We met quickly in a supermarket parking lot. Claire handed me another USB drive, smaller than the first. "System logs," she said. "Access records. Every time Mark requests an update, there's an order restricting family contact immediately afterward." I didn't open it there. I thanked her, went home, and sent everything to Richard. Around noon, Richard called. "They just filed for a temporary order," he said. "If it's granted, you won't be allowed to contact Emily directly until the competency evaluation is concluded." I asked when the court would review it. 2 weeks, he said. Possibly sooner. I looked at the calendar on the wall. 2 weeks was long enough for someone to be silenced and short enough to leave no room for mistakes. "What do we do next?" I asked. "We go straight to the facility," Richard said. "We need someone on the inside to come forward." That same afternoon, Richard introduced me to a private investigator named Michael Torres, a former medical compliance inspector. We met at the law office. No long handshake, no small talk. Michael reviewed the documents, the USB drives, the access logs. "This is enough for me to get inside as an independent reviewer," he said. "But once I do, they'll know something's wrong." I asked how long it would take. "A few days," Michael replied, "and you need to be ready for a strong reaction." That reaction came sooner than I expected. On Sunday morning, the police knocked on my door. 2 officers, polite and professional. They said they had received a request for a welfare check. They asked if I was okay, if I knew what day it was. I answered briefly and accurately. I asked for their names and badge numbers and wrote them down. They left after 10 minutes, leaving a confirmation slip behind. I sent a photo of it to Richard immediately. He called back, his voice low. "They're building a case," he said, "but you handled it well." That afternoon, Michael texted, "Inside, found discrepancies. Will report soon." I read the message twice, then placed my phone face down. Mark called immediately afterward. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "You're making things harder than they need to be, Dad." His voice calm. "Emily needs stability. You should think about her future." I didn't delete the message. I saved it. That evening, I received an email with the official court date for my competency evaluation. The date was clear. The location was clear. I printed it out and placed it on the table next to Mark's original petition. The two documents looked disturbingly similar. I understood that if I lost here, everything would end. I would no longer have the legal standing to ask anything about Emily. But this time, I didn't just have a feeling. I had records. I had witnesses. I had an investigator in exactly the right place. I folded the papers, arranged them neatly, and prepared for the next step. The counterattack had begun, and I knew that from this point on, none of us could pretend this was just a family misunderstanding anymore. The hearing was scheduled for a Monday morning. I arrived at the courthouse 20 minutes early, carrying a slim folder, nothing more. Richard came with me, calm to the point of near coldness. He didn't say much on the way, only reminded me once more of what I needed to remember. Answer only the question asked. Don't elaborate, don't argue. Today, he said as we passed through security, the truth doesn't need emotion. The courtroom wasn't large, but it was solemn enough to make people slow their speech. High ceiling, white lights, wooden benches arranged in straight rows. Mark was already there. He sat beside two lawyers, dark suit, neat tie, the posture of a devoted husband forced into an unwanted situation. When he saw me, he gave a slight nod like a polite greeting. I didn't return it. I sat down across from him, opened my case, placed the folder on the table, and closed it. The judge entered exactly on time. She was a middle-aged woman with a clear voice and no wasted words. The hearing began with Mark's attorneys presenting their case. They spoke of legitimate concerns, of signs of confusion, of my excessive interference in my daughter's medical care. They cited phone calls, emails, and the police welfare check. Everything was woven together neatly, logically, like a carefully prepared report. I listened, hands resting on the table, unmoving. When they finished, the judge turned to Richard. "Mr. Holt?" Richard stood. He didn't rebut immediately. He opened his laptop and connected it to the courtroom screen. "Your Honor," he said, "we are not here to debate a father's emotions. We are here because there is evidence that the guardianship over Emily Carter was established based on false information." He gestured, and the first video appeared. The gray room. The timestamp, clear and visible. Mark entering the frame. No narration, no music, just images. The courtroom fell silent. The second video, the woman in a white lab coat. A signature. The third video, a hallway. Emily's eyes looking directly into the camera. Richard paused. "These," he said, "are the very days the other side claims Emily was abroad." Mark's lawyer jumped to his feet in objection. The judge raised her hand. "I will watch all of it," she said. Richard moved on to the next document, the medical report. He pointed to the vague diagnosis, to Mark's signature, to the absence of any notation that Emily posed a danger to herself or others. "There is no basis for total isolation," Richard said. "Only legal convenience." The judge turned to Mark. "Mr. Carter," she said, "would you like to explain these videos?" Mark stood. He said Emily had agreed to admission that every decision had been made in his wife's best interest, that the videos did not reflect the full context. The judge nodded, then turned back to Richard. "Anything further?" Richard nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. We request testimony from a former employee of the facility." Claire was called to the stand. She trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. She spoke about restricted contact orders, about file updates made immediately after each of Mark's visits, about the family being deliberately excluded. The opposing counsel tried to interrupt, but the judge allowed her to continue. Richard concluded with a brief request. "We ask that the court allow Emily Carter to appear for an independent evaluation." There was a pause. Mark leaned toward his lawyers, whispering. The judge looked down at the file, then tapped her gavel lightly. "The request is granted," she said. "I want to hear directly from Emily Carter." That same afternoon, Emily was brought into the courtroom. Not on a stretcher, not in need of special assistance. She walked in slowly but steadily, eyes forward. I rose instinctively, then sat back down at the judge's signal. Emily took the witness seat. "Ms. Carter," the judge said, "do you understand why you're here today?" "Yes," Emily answered, "because I was placed under guardianship without my true consent." The courtroom went silent again. The judge asked a few questions to assess orientation. Emily answered accurately without hesitation. Then came the most important question. Do you wish to continue having your husband make decisions on your behalf? Emily shook her head. No, I want to decide for myself. Mark's attorney objected, citing earlier reports. Richard stood again. Your Honor, he said, we have one more piece of evidence. He played a short audio recording. Mark's voice rang clearly through the courtroom, speaking about the need to control everything before it's too late. No explanation of who recorded it, no dramatics, just the words. The judge turned off the microphone and looked directly at Mark. Do you wish to add anything? Mark remained seated. He did not answer. The decision was issued the same day. The guardianship over Emily Carter was temporarily suspended, effective immediately. An independent medical evaluation was ordered. The petition for my competency evaluation was dismissed. The judge concluded with a single sentence. The court will continue to review the legal responsibility of the parties involved. When the gavel struck, Mark was still seated, staring down at the table. I didn't speak as we left the courtroom. Emily walked beside me, not touching me, but the distance between us was no longer what it had been before. Richard shook my hand once briefly. It's not over, he said. I nodded. I knew. But for the first time in more than 2 years, my daughter's story was no longer being told by someone else, and that, for me, was enough to begin a new chapter. Emily left the care facility the morning after the hearing. No sirens, no reporters, no one waiting, just me, Richard, and a rental car parked out front. Emily walked out carrying a small bag, truly small, just enough for a few clothes and a thin notebook. The staff member handed over the paperwork, signed everything quickly, as if they wanted it finished as soon as possible. I opened the car door and Emily sat in the front seat. No hugging, no tears. We just looked at each other for a second, long enough to confirm that we were both here, in the same place, no longer separated by screens or cameras. The next 2 weeks passed with very specific tasks. Emily met with an independent doctor as ordered by the court. The conclusion was clear and brief. Competent. No guardianship required. Richard filed additional motions requesting an investigation into guardianship abuse and restrictions on family contact. I signed documents authorizing Emily to manage her own finances. Everything happened on paper first, and only then touched emotion. That was the only way to make sure no one could rewrite the story again. Mark was ordered to surrender his electronic devices. His lawyer proposed negotiations. Richard refused. I didn't take part in those discussions. I focused on what was directly in front of me. Emily moved into my house temporarily. Her old room was still there. I cleaned it in one morning, removed what wasn't needed, changed the sheets, opened the windows to let the sunlight in. Emily stood in the doorway, looking around like someone returning to a familiar place without being sure she was allowed to stay. You can stay as long as you want, I said. She nodded. That was enough. In the first days, Emily slept a lot. I didn't ask questions. I cooked, set a bowl in front of her, cleared it when she finished. We talked about small things. A new grocery store that had opened, the apple tree in the yard producing fewer apples this year, the neighbor's cat that liked to nap on our porch. When Emily was ready, she started talking. Not at length, not in order, just fragments, visitation schedules being cut, her phone being taken, evaluations that happened without explanation. I listened. I didn't correct her, didn't ask why. I wrote down dates, names, timelines, and passed them to Richard when needed. The rest, I left alone. 3 months later, the court issued its final decision. The guardianship was permanently revoked. The care facility was placed under a full investigation. Other cases were reopened. I didn't follow the details in the news. Richard updated me when necessary. Mark was charged with offenses related to guardianship abuse and fraud. I didn't attend his trial, not because I didn't care, but because my role ended where it needed to. What remained belonged to the law. Emily started working part-time at a library near my house. Not for the money, for rhythm. She walked in the mornings, made coffee, came home at regular hours. We ate dinner together. There were no big conversations about the future, just plans for the next day. I noticed the change in her eyes. She no longer scanned every corner of the room before sitting down. She started driving herself again, started meeting old friends, started leaving her phone in another room without worry. One evening, Emily placed a stack of papers in front of me. I want you to look at these, she said. They were notes she had written while she was being held. Not an emotional diary, just dates, names, short phrases she remembered. I didn't know if they would be useful, she said, but I was afraid that if I didn't write them down, I would forget. I went through each page, marking what was relevant for the case. You did the right thing, I said. Emily nodded. Nothing more was needed. 6 months after the hearing, my house no longer felt temporary. Emily moved into her own apartment nearby, but still came over for dinner a few nights a week. I learned not to ask too many questions. Emily learned to say no when she needed to. We agreed on one simple rule. No one speaks for the other. If someone called asking about Emily, Emily answered herself. If someone needed my paperwork, I signed it myself. Everything slowed down in a healthy way. One afternoon, while we were sitting on the porch, Emily asked me a short question. "Dad, are you angry at me?" I shook my head. "I'm angry that I didn't ask sooner," I said. Emily looked down at her hands, then back up. "Me too," she said. We let the conversation end there. There was no need to dig deeper to prove anything. Looking back, I don't see what happened as a victory. There was no celebration, no sense of revenge. There were long-term consequences, meetings with lawyers, nights when Emily couldn't sleep. But one thing is clear. The story was returned to the person it belonged to, and that matters more than anything else. I learned that the explanations that sound the most reasonable can also be the most dangerous because they give us permission to stop asking questions. I also learned that silence, if it lasts long enough, becomes a form of unintentional complicity. If anyone listening to this story finds it familiar, I don't have grand advice. I'll say one very specific thing. Don't let someone else speak for the person you love. Don't accept repeated later answers. Ask one more time. And if someone places a brown paper package into your hands on an otherwise ordinary morning, don't brush it aside just because you're busy keeping everything looking fine. I chose to believe because believing was easier than doubting. This time, I chose to ask, and that choice brought my daughter home.